This election is all about change.
A plan for change. Deliver stability and change.
Labour swept to victory last summer on one promise above all others. Change proved to be a vote winner. Re-election in 4 years' time will likely depend on fixing public services in ways people notice and reviving economic growth in ways they can feel. Wednesday is a key moment.
We're definitely going to get winners and losers in the spending review. There just isn't enough money available for all bits of government to win.
The decisions the Chancellor makes will affect the public services we use every day. In many cases, those services are visibly under strain. The proportion of people receiving elective, non-emergency treatment like cataract surgery or hip replacements within 18 weeks on the NHS in England was falling before the pandemic. It has since slumped further to 55%. The target is 92%. The last time it was hit was in February 2016. The government has pledged to hit this target again before the next election. School children performing worse in exams. The proportion of students scoring grade 4 or above at GCSE for English and maths, the expected standard, has slipped from 71% in 2020 to 65% in 2024. Prisons are overcrowded and violence is on the rise. The number of prisoner assaults on staff has almost trebled in the last 10 years to 2,627 in the last 3 months of last year. That's a record. And councils are increasingly struggling to provide the daily services we rely on. The amount of emergency funding has ballooned from £77 million to £1.5 billion in the space of 6 years. 1 in 5 local authorities are now unable to clean the streets, collect rubbish, maintain the roads, run libraries, provide housing, social care or children's services without financial support from the government.
I'm sat in St James's Park, just across the road from the Treasury. Inside, the Chancellor and her officials are making difficult decisions. Rachel Reeves has already set out how much money the government will spend in the next few years. In her spending review, she'll tell us where that money will be spent. £600 billion of annual funding will be allocated to different parts of government. That is a very large sum, but not enough to do everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Paul Johnson has spent the last 14 years scrutinising spending reviews and budgets. He's about to stand down as head of the Institute for Fiscal Studies.
There's never enough money, but there really isn't very much money at the moment. The Chancellor has set herself a very, very tight constraint in terms of what she wants to spend, and the result will be some people will be disappointed. Some public services won't get better in the way that the government wants them to.
OK, so there are basically 2 types of government spending. Day-to-day spending is the money used to run public services, keeping things going, paying staff, maintaining services. And then there's investment spending, which is the money channelled at big, long-term projects designed to improve things in future. So in the case of a park, for example, paying people to plant flowers and mow the grass, that's day-to-day spending. Building a new cafe or installing benches, that's investment spending.
The government has already announced significant above-inflation increases to both day-to-day and investment spending for last year and this year. This spending review will allocate money to departments for 2026, 27 and the years beyond that. But the growth rates of spending are less generous and investment spending is set to fall, which means difficult choices are unavoidable. A key question is how much will the Chancellor decide to spend on health? The NHS is the largest public service by far, and it's the service the public cares most about. In recent years, spending on health has hoovered up an increasing share of total spending. The Chancellor will also confirm how much further spending on defence will rise and how quickly. Since the 1950s, government spending on defence has steadily fallen as a share of national income, allowing more money to be spent on health and social care. Defence spending stands at around 2% of GDP. The government has pledged to increase that to 2.5% by 2027, which will require an extra £6 billion a year. Beyond that, there's the aim of hitting 3% in the next Parliament. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that would cost an additional £17 billion a year.
If we're moving into a new world where defence spending is rising and health spending will also rise and pension spending and so on will also rise. We're in a very different world, and one where it's going to be very hard to see how we avoid actually raising taxes to pay for this growing welfare state and growing defence spending.
The average annual growth in day-to-day public spending is set at 1.2% over this spending review period. If the Chancellor chooses to boost NHS funding by, say, 3.4% a year, in line with the long-run average over the past 70 years, and enough to materially improve NHS performance according to the IFS, and if she also lifts defence spending sufficiently to hit the 3% of GDP target in time for the next Parliament, then the IFS says all other departments, including education, would face real terms cuts of 1.8% a year. That would be tough, but not as severe as the 3.3% annual cuts imposed by George Osborne during the coalition years from 2010 to 2015. To avoid cuts altogether, Rachel Reeves would need to find an extra £12 billion in 28-29.
You may be thinking, why not just borrow more to fix this? Well, the Institute for Fiscal Studies has a Be the Chancellor game on its website, and it shows just how sharply the national debt has risen over the last 20 years. Right now, the government spends almost twice as much on debt interest as it does on the entire defence budget. The Chancellor's own fiscal rules limit how much more she can borrow, and she's also pledged not to raise the main taxes. So when it comes to this game, the truth is there's not much room for manoeuvre.
Do you know, I think we should feel some sympathy for the Chancellor. I mean, there are some reasons not to, because she wasn't exactly open about the problems before the election last year, but she did inherit a really, really, really difficult situation with very high levels of tax already, completely implausible spending plans from the last government. There's no way they could have kept to those spending plans. She's been forced, I think genuinely forced, into increasing taxes, and she's now got some really tough decisions on spending, and she might be forced again to raise taxes in the autumn.
Of course, the Chancellor may get lucky. The economy may suddenly find a higher gear, and a surge in tax revenues could fund the pressures of an ageing population. But if Rachel Reeves isn't lucky, then stark choices loom into view. Ditch the fiscal rules and borrow more, raise taxes, or have the state do less. Without stronger economic growth, something will probably have to give.